or if you haven't found a seat yet, you can come and get one up here. Don't be shy. My name's Liz Birnbaum. I'm the program coordinator for EcoFarm. So, thank you. It's such an honor being here with all of you. I don't know most of you. I just moved here from Chicago in June, so this is my new home. And I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight. I'm here to introduce Denise O'Brien. Denise is a community organizer and farmer from Atlantic, Iowa, where she's been farming with her husband Larry for more than 40 years. As an organizer, she seeks to build not just bridges, which perhaps make connections from one side to another side, but to nurture and activate networks, which I find a more powerful idea. She creates action plans facilitating deep participation, which helps to feed this world in a more sustainable and just way. Denise's career has consisted of farming and farm activism, from the founding of the Women Food and Agriculture Network to also having recently completed a year as a USDA agriculture advisor in Afghanistan. Denise has also been a delegate for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization's Committee on Agriculture and has received numerous awards for her work. Please join me as we welcome Denise O'Brien.
So good evening. I just have to preface what I'm going to say tonight, that to share with you something that's pretty emotional to me tonight and my husband. It was in 1979 that we first heard John Trudell. And we were at a national gathering of the people, maybe some of you were there, in the Black Hills. It was the Pahasapa. It was to stop the mining in the Black Hills. And we heard him in a high school gym, I think it was, and we were so profoundly overwhelmed by what you had to say, John, that it has been an inspiration to us as we've done our community organizing and our part in making the world a better world. So I thank you for that. So this evening, good evening, a huge thank you to the staff of EcoFarm and to the staff at Asilomar. I've already felt really welcomed here and very comfortable here. You're providing us with a bit of respite from the frantic world we live in. Thank you, all of you, for making the journey here to learn and share and to make the world a better place. Words cannot capture what it is that I'm feeling here on this stage, talking to the game changers of agriculture. I am honored and privileged to be here speaking to you, my husband and soulmate, Larry Harris, and I greet you from the former rolling prairies of Iowa, where testosterone-driven industrial agribusiness continues to rape and pillage, and where the majority of farmers are the instruments of destruction. There are vestiges of paradise among the millions of acres of GMO crops, and those continue to grow, but in reality, we live in the belly of the beast. Given this situation, we continue to grow, to work to restructure the face of agribusiness to a more nature-friendly and people-friendly agriculture. Work here, I'm just making sure the pictures are going, work that will take the rest of our lifetime and beyond. As I prepared for the event, the theme of feeding the world I played mind games with it in a way. We conjured up a lot of meanings, many interpretations. And first of all, in Iowa, we've worked hard to dispel the notion that farmers feed the world, that many commodity growers feel a strong moral obligation to feed the world, but the moral obligation has been a ploy used by agribusiness to dupe the farmers into being their lackeys. We don't feed the world. And some parts of the world, most of the world, would rather feed themselves. Don't get me wrong, the farmers of Iowa and rural America are great people. They're general, they're good, solid, conservative, in the social justice way. Citizens that feel strongly about family, community, and country. It has always been a question with me at how they so willingly carry the water for corporate agribusiness. Feeding the world you want to live in can also conjure up what it is political and economic. I'm going to raise food for people who can afford to buy my food and pay me what I need to be paid. Now I realize that opens up a can of worms, and those are for us to ponder. Is there anything wrong with this type of philosophy? Not really. It is a way of capitalism, and it is an economic system, and that is an economic system that many people feel works in our country. It is a self-preserving type of philosophy, and it helps people survive. Feeding the world we want to live in, the philosophy that permeates this conference, I believe, is based on how we can make this a better world as we feed the soil and feed the people, as we feed the Mother Earth. The slideshow represents my community of farmers, of my farm and my neighborhood, and it also represents the destruction of the soil and the land that are represented in these pictures that I have taken in about a 3 square mile area of our farm. We live on the farm that my husband grew up on, Larry grew up on, and we live in the house he grew up in, and we're very, very privileged to be able to do that. The slash and burn of the trees and shrubs that you'll see in the slides are for a few more acres of production. It represents the short-sightedness of our neighbors. I try hard to understand why they do this, and it always comes back to farm policy. Farm policy has favored large corporate agribusiness over the health of the soil in rural communities. Commodity agribusiness owns Washington, and until we seriously have laws that control campaign spending, we, the small and medium-sized farmers, will continue to lose. So the words of the conference brochure suggest it's time to reflect on the achievements, honor the past, and look critically at the present and plan thoughtfully for the future. I really appreciate those words. It's the thoughtfulness, the time that it takes, the common sense that it takes to be able to feed a world, to be able to feed the earth, and to be able to come out on top of things. And on top of things, I mean that everybody is a part of what is living, and everybody is treated with dignity and respect. So I rearranged some of the words in the conference brochure and to start my presentation with a critical look at the present. In order to set the stage for the future, we also need to acknowledge the past and the present for the positive work that has been accomplished. There are many, many people who have gone before us to raise awareness of the dangers of chemical agriculture and the use of harsh chemicals to control pests and insects. Of course, we all know Rachel Carson, one of the most highly respected whistleblowers. She did not have an easy time raising the alarms of harmful chemicals. And then, rather than name names and risk overlooking some especially important people, I want to suggest and encourage you to think of the heroines and heroes in your own lives that have guided your way, people who may have influenced you sometime in your life that may not be on the register of well-known or big names. People like a parent, a neighbor, a teacher, a professor, a farmer, a scientist. Someone who caused you to stop and think. Think about what it means. Think of what life means. Think about what it means for life in the soil. Someone who took the risk of taking a different path. There are huge numbers of people who fit this description. Many in this room who have been selflessly working the land, teaching students, working on local, state, and national and international policy to transform the way things are currently done. And sometimes it feels like we're swimming upstream. We have to be bold to do the things that are not the norm, to do things out of the ordinary, but so critical to the foundation of the legacy of the soil health. I care about the future, and I'm excited about the future, even though film, the pictures that you're going to start seeing are not so pleasant. I think what we can do is change what these pictures represent: the rape and the pillage, the slash and burn of rural America. I'm excited about and care about women in agriculture. The demographics now show that women are going into agriculture at a faster pace than men. And yes. And yet we still have the face of agriculture in the United States as the male. And not to discredit the males, you're doing a pretty good job. I think we could do better. I think we need to have an equal space at the table. I don't think we need to be treated special, differently, or anything. We just need to have a seat at the table along with you. We are 50% of the population. So I'm really, and I hear stories all the time. I heard another one today about a young woman being treated a little bit patronistically in some things that were being explained to her about farming or about a certain tool or something. It's like, this is kind of a man's job, but I'll teach you how to do it, So I care deeply, deeply. And I also care about the women who own the land. And in Iowa, we've been working on a project that's been totally exciting to me. And women own 50% of the rentable farmland in Iowa, and pretty much that in the United States. The reason for that is we live longer. So with that, we need to work hard to do the best we can with the resources that we have. So I've been doing work with women landowners in Iowa for probably about 10 or 12 years now. And it's very, very interesting to me because they're an older generation of women. Some who are empowered, many who are not. And some who say, well, I'll tell them what I think and what I want done. And others saying, oh, I couldn't do that. These women don't own large land. They don't have large land holdings. They have maybe 160, maybe 80 acres, maybe 50 acres, maybe 600 acres and that. But they're not making decisions about their land. And so we're bringing women together to talk about this. And what we found with over 1,000 women, I know for sure, in meetings over the last 10 to 12 years, is that women want natural resource and conservation management on their farms, and they want families on their farms. And look at this, yes. The pictures that you see depict the total opposite. This is bad farm management. This is treating the earth like a commodity. This is not, this rain that happened this last spring, one of the few rains that we did have, made all this stuff happen, and it's happening because we've abused the soil. It's because we've not taken care of it. It just makes my heart sick. And so the women want different things done with their land than what is happening to their land. So we're working to bring women together, to have a support group. And it's a difficult situation to be in because these women, it might be their nephew, it might be their brother, it's a close relative who's farming their land, and so they defer to the decisions of the tenant, and just to avoid sticky situations. And the tenant has to work the farm policy. And so there's two different kinds of philosophies going on about what kind of farming. So with the work that we're doing, we're making some headway. And my dream is to match women who own land with women who don't own land, and that there will be new farmers started in that way. Now, we'll include some of the young men too. That's okay, but we're just going to make it hopefully a way that young people can get into farming. And you know what? I got to talk about not young people, but some people who are making career changes. Not all beginning farmers are young people. And I think it's fair to say that many people, when they've gotten to a certain point in their life, they're going like, I didn't like what I was doing, and I think I'll do something else. Farming sounds good. Or maybe they came from a farm, so they're going back to their farm. So I feel very privileged that I met my husband, and I met him in 1975, and he said, I'm going to be an organic farmer. And it's like, whoa, really? And we were married 6 months later, and here we are, 37 years later. And so it's been the best ride of my life. So our work has taken us through many years of ups and downs for sure. But like I said, I really believe in the future, and I really believe in the families and farmers on the land. And there's a lot to do. There's a whole lot to do. And you all know that, and you're out there doing it. Just farming and keeping your farm together as a whole is really difficult some days. So, but I think that last week I was attending a meeting with a whole group of people, intergenerational group of people, that some were farmers, some were academics, some were lawyers and that, and we were talking about land and land reform, and how do farmers who are renting land and that, how do they build an equity to be able to buy a farm? So are they, some of the issues we talked about is, can we build an equity in the soil? So say we build the soil, we make it better than it was before we got there, and can there be some kind of a value put on it so that is equity towards buying or purchasing a farm? What can we do to help people who have no equity be able to, to purchase or rent? We talked about land trusts, we talked about donor invested. There's a whole multitude, and many of you maybe are having those kind of conversations. So there's a lot of work to do. And how can we accomplish that? We can accomplish that by being in solidarity with our brothers and sisters all over the country. I feel sometimes that California, it's a special place. There's no doubt about it. I lived in California in the early 70s. And I was part of the anti-war movement during that time. And I lived in the Bay Area. And it was a special place then, and it's a special place now. As I said earlier, and what I was talking is that we live in the belly of the beast, and it's not so friendly there sometimes. In fact, it's very isolating and very lonely at times. Although my husband and I are pretty self-contained, and we've been able to, live our principles and our community that we live near. We went to school there, and a lot of people know us from when we were little kids in school. They've come to learn to respect us for standing up for principles. In fact, yesterday morning before we left for California, we were in our local bank, and a guy who's known us for a long time, he says, you guys, I really admire what you've been doing. And it was really nice of him to say that. He was a businessman in Atlantic, where we live, and a Republican. So, for him to say something like that to pretty liberal, progressive Democrats, then that was quite a thing. And it was really heartwarming to hear him say something like that. And so we do know that some things are changing at some point in time. They've been changing. When we started farming organically in 1975, we couldn't say the O word. It's now a word that's out, And I can go to my local store in a town of 7,000 people, and I can sell my products there now. And it's pretty amazing that this, that this happens. And a lot of times I'll overhear conversations of people in the grocery stores talking about organics and talking about things, and it just makes me feel warm and fuzzy. It makes me giggle. It just makes me feel that what we've decided to do so many years ago has proved to be what we were right. And we were not right so much as that in our gut we knew that we had to do something different than what was happening. We've worked to change things, and some things have changed and many things haven't. And I guess that's my challenge to you about tonight and about the next few days that you're here and the days that you go home and you think about what you're doing in relationship to the big picture and in relationship to what John had to say to us earlier about knowledge and power and common sense. I mean, there's just so many things. And I feel that some of the things that were said a couple days ago in the presidential, in the inaugural speech, applies to us in a lot of ways, although we're a few steps ahead of the president, I believe, and that's about maybe more than a few. Okay, But anyway, it was really pleasing to see him stand up for things that we really, that we believe in. There was a lot of things he missed, but if we can change the tide of a me generation to a we generation, I think that will really work for us. And I think all of us have been about that already, and for a long time, and have felt pretty lonely out there. So we have a lot of work to do, and as I'll quote the brochure from what inspired you to all come here when you got your piece in the mail. It says, how can we in reality most effectively merge our aspirations for sustainable and just futures on the path we are on? When faced with the overwhelming causes that deserve our attentions, how can we effectively collaborate to bring about the most sustainable, equitable, and just path for all living creatures? Those are a lot to think about. And one thing that I've always appreciated about being a farmer was having the ability to go to conferences like this, or go to just a couple weeks ago, the Practical Farmers of Iowa, an organization I belong to, just get my head full of everything that there is about whatever's there, and then go home and process it. Go home and can't pull weeds in the wintertime, but I can do things that are productive, that make those thoughts, flourish and catch on to other thoughts and other discussions, and work at changing the world. So I want to honor you all tonight for being here. I think it's a wonderful place to be. It's a really nice, we left our home at 8 degrees, I think it was. So even though you may think it's cold here, we're really enjoying it. It's really nice to have, to hear the rain. We are very much on the edge of another drought for the coming year. We have had no precipitation hardly in the wintertime, so we're hoping for spring rains. And it'll be a while before we see it and hear it. But I wish you all the best for the next year of your production, of your building sustainable communities, of your families, building your families and your communities, and just the most success at the work that you're doing. Congratulations for what you're doing, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise. The work you're doing and the issues you raise are really critical, so thank you for being here. I'm here to introduce Brian Halweil. This is a time where we come to connect. We come to break down perceived barriers and borders, to really look at things in a different way. Brian is someone who does exactly that. He looks at the world and it's all of its complexities, and he finds a thread, and he picks it up. And in one continuum, he considers organic farming, medical science, biotechnology, and rural communities. He has his eye on nurturing the small and the big, but he sees big challenges for eco-farmers everywhere. Brian has contemplated whether organic farming can feed us all, and he has written that, which I think this connects with Denise as well, there's no question that large industrial farms can produce lots of food. Indeed, they're designed to maximize quantity. But when the farmer becomes little more than the lowest cost producer of raw materials, more than his or her own welfare will suffer. Brian is the author of the recent book, Eat Here, Reclaiming Homegrown Pleasures in a Global Supermarket. He's also editor and publisher of edible magazines. Please welcome me and join in. Wow, I just did that. Hi, everybody. Please welcome Brian Halweil.
Thank you, Liz, for that introduction, and thank you, EcoFarm, and thank you to whoever grew and arranged perhaps the prettiest edible installation art I've ever seen, and that I get to share the stage with. This is a sort of a homecoming for me. I spent many formative years not too far from here. I planted and harvested my first crop of garlic while volunteering at Green Gulch in Marin. I learned how to double dig in Willits with John Jevons and Ecology Action. I did some time at UC Davis. I worked a stint at Underwood Farms on the Oxnard Plain south of here. First got introduced to Edible Ojai, the first edible magazine, over lunch at the Cliff House Inn in Muscle Shoals. I attended my first EcoFarm conference in 1995, and I saw my first Ed show at Shoreline Amphitheater. So because I feel at home with you all, I'd like to make a confession. I have lost my way. After more than 2 decades as a booster of the food movement, whether you call it the local food movement or the ecological food movement or the sustainable food movement, I feel a little bit like a cheerleader who has lost his pep. I have been guided by the faith that food can change the world, but lately I fear, I wonder if it's in fact true. Let me explain. You wouldn't know it at first glance, but this is me, circa 1997, about 100 miles north of here, at the student-run farm that I started at Stanford University. On the left, I'm holding a mustard plant, part of an effort to document the pernicious weeds on that land. The shot on the right is me with a U-bar that I cut and welded as part of a civil engineering class I needed to complete in order to graduate. I'm not sure what to make of the hair and the mutton chops and the hat, but this is how I assumed California farmers dressed. And I'm glad to see tonight there are still some people sporting this look. Now, I wasn't raised on a farm, so my intention with starting this one was to create a place where I could get my hands dirty. This was a campus, keep in mind, with no classes offered in gardening or farming or food for that matter. I recall one economics course where the professor argued adamantly in trying to explain the idea of comparative advantage that if Mexico can buy corn on the world market cheaper than it can grow it at home, then there's no reason for Mexico to grow any corn. Nonetheless, the first season at the Stanford farm, hundreds of students showed up to help plant asparagus and berry bushes and fruit trees and shape the hard-pan soil into long, airy, raised beds. One of those students was Chelsea Clinton. Yes, that Chelsea, daughter of Bill and Hillary, who I recently heard quoted in an interview saying that it was her brief time working at the Stanford farm that got her interested in food policy. Now, I had minimal contact with the farm, with the student farmers who came after me, but miraculously, the farm remains. Here's a shot of it today. Where there was once a 3-acre neglected patch of grass, there are now no fewer than 4 on-farm courses offered to hundreds of students each season. The farm sells to on-campus dining halls and restaurants and makes regular donations to the local food pantry. PhD students have run insect ecology experiments at the farm, and the farm even inspired a sustainable food policy for the campus that included regional buying for food service, increased composting, and divesting university funds from agribusiness firms like PepsiCo. Now, here was my first sweet taste. Here was my first sweet taste of the transformational power of food, and I was hooked. This became the dominant narrative of my life, of my work, of my household ever since. In fact, I made a career documenting the food revolution that was all around me. I wrote a book about the local food movement in America, and I peddled food as a gateway drug to interest people in global challenges like climate change and water pollution and poverty and hunger. And then this narrative became even more personal when I moved to an old whaling town on the east end of Long Island and became a hands-on player in the food renaissance that I was writing about. I launched a magazine, Edible East End, devoted to celebrating and chronicling my food and drink community and encouraging other people to support it. And my faith that food was changing the world around me continued to grow. It swelled in me all the way up to the brim. How could it not? Everywhere I turned, I saw examples of this bright new food system emerging. Let me zoom in a little bit. Here is where I call home. Lying about 70 miles east of New York City, the East End is one of the oldest communities in the country, with some farm families counting back 15 generations and some fishing families whose claim on a given clamming spot extending back to a 16th century grant from King George of England. Long Island is a glacial moraine covered with legendary dirt called Bridgehampton loam. It's a quick-draining, nutrient-rich combination of silt and loam and sand revered by soil scientists. Many local historians have noted that from the sky, Long Island looks like a fish, with its head touching New York City in the west and its forked tail reaching into the ocean in the east. If the history of modern agriculture reads like a mass extinction event, small farms gobbled by large ones, crop varieties narrowed and lost, real options limited, then to live and eat on the East End today is like watching that process unfold in reverse. Consider that in just the last 10 years, there are 12 bustling farmers markets where there were once none. This is a friend of mine, a neighbor of mine, David Falkowski. He comes from a farming family that's been growing potatoes and cauliflower in our area since the Polish migration of the 1840s. In my community, David is known as the mushroom man, perhaps for obvious reasons, but in reality for the shiitake and oyster mushrooms that he grows. Even more interesting, over the last decade, he has shifted from selling his crops almost entirely to wholesale customers, like his father and grandfather and previous generations did before him, to selling almost everything entirely at these 12 new farmers markets in our area. In fact, he claims that this shift saved his farm, and he's one of the few members of his family that is still farming. And because there are dozens of farmers like David in my community, other businesses have popped up alongside them, from a couple of local seed banks to food delivery services, catering to small farmers, to commercial kitchens, turning local produce into shelf-stable foods. A few years ago, there were no local producers of pork or beef in my area, but as eager eaters wanted something to pair with their winter squash and cabbage, a couple of dozen vegetable farms expanded their herds of sheep and goats and pigs and poultry to meet the growing demand for local meat and eggs. There are now no fewer than 4 raw milk dairies, where just a decade ago there were none. In my own backyard, my family and I started keeping black Cayuga ducks, a heritage laying breed from upstate New York. They are particularly beautiful this time of year, with a foot of snow on the ground, the black duck feathers juxtaposed against the white snow. I did have a cover crop on these beds, I promise you. It was vetch and oats, but I quickly learned that the ducks would make quick work of that. In fact, so many of my neighbors have recently started keeping poultry that the village I live in changed its 100-year-old zoning law banning households keeping poultry. This is how it's supposed to work, right? The push and pull of supply and demand that means more money stays in the local economy, more farmers stay on the land, communities adjust their laws to make it easier to grow food, and we all eat better as a result. And this change can happen wicked fast and take form in ways we can't immediately imagine. How about what we pour down our gullets when we belly up to the bar? I heard there are some cider fans in the audience. Is that true? Yeah. I like cider too. I also like beer, and I like wine, and I've even been known to drink a little bit of whiskey. I've got 2 kids under 5, so I've got an excuse. But that aside, alcohol is really underrated as a high-margin added value product for farmers. Just this year on the east end of Long Island, no fewer than 3 farms added substantial acreage of hops. It's one of the fastest growing crops in the Northeast, and it hasn't been a significant crop for decades, if not centuries. The expanding hops fields have been commissioned by breweries, by the Southampton Public House, by the Greenport Harbor Beer Company, and by Brooklyn Brewery, which you may have heard of, to meet the demands of a blooming beer-drinking culture that filters all the way down to the beer chain to bars whose tap lines are hooked up exclusively to New York-made kegs. Now, we've heard of CSAs, but have you heard of wine clubs, which nearly all the 50-some-odd wineries on Long Island have launched? Like a CSA, members get regular shipments of wine, but they might also get to stomp grapes or taste wines from the barrel before they're released. And they begin to feel a vested interest in the success, in the life of that winery. In fact, wine grapes have now surpassed potatoes as the biggest crop on Long Island. And whereas a potato farm needs a couple hundred acres today to support its family, a winery can support a family on a dozen acres or less. Like most of what we put in our mouths today, the liquor business in America is highly concentrated, with a few big brands dominating the market. But the fastest growing segment of the liquor business is what are called premium spirits, many of which are small batch and artisanal. Oregon is the national leader in licensed microbreweries, microdistilleries. You might have heard that. New York is a close second. California is somewhere in the top 10. What's pushing the industry in all these states are enlightened laws, like they recently passed for beer and spirits in New York, that make it easy for farms to set up stills, and that require that the majority of the grain or feedstock come from farms in the state. Now, these are some of my favorite brands, and this phenomenon goes by many names. We sometimes call it the locavore pour, farm to bottle, crop to keg, crop to cask, seed to still. There's a long list. I'll spare you. Whatever you call it, it sates the thirst of drinkers who care as much about the origins of the rye in their whiskey or the apples in their hard cider as they do about the beef in their burgers. Yes, there are inspiring changes happening throughout the landscape and throughout our diets. And since I live in a maritime community, and since we're a stone's throw from Cannery Row, I've also got to point to the sea. How about this? A program in my neck of the woods run by Cornell University to enlist citizen oyster gardeners to help replenish the wild oyster beds of the Peconic Bay. Anyone can join. Members get trained in basic aquaculture. They get set up with baby oysters, oyster cages, and even a place to keep them on the waterfront. It's the largest community aquaculture program in the country, and it regularly seeds millions of baby shellfish into the waters each year. And this ultimately means more shellfish for baymen and baywomen to harvest over the long term. Now, in full disclosure, I'm a member of this program. I got into it because, as a perk, members get to keep half of what they raise for their own consumption, returning the other half to the bays. And as you might imagine, come harvest in the fall and winter, we members have the serious oyster hookup. We invite our friends and neighbors to come to big oyster parties where we all dine on fried oysters and oyster chowder and oyster po' boys, and to slurp them down raw if that's your preference. And when neighbors learn that someone is growing oysters nearby, they're inspired to join the program and plant their own. This is part of the reason that in just the last few years the program has grown to include nearly 300 gardeners all around the Peconic Bay. I like to think of each of these blue dots like underwater mollusk militias fighting pollution along the coast. Even better, this program on Long Island has become a blueprint for campaigns in Florida, Seattle, and Japan at a time when local governments and environmental groups are struggling to tackle coastal pollution, which is exactly what healthy shellfish populations help to do. You see, this is food changing the world. Now, perhaps the most exciting example of this transformation, the one that makes me feel positive and one that's near and dear to my heart, is the domino effect of edible schoolyards in my area. A few years ago, a school in the next town over from me put in a greenhouse and a garden and a teaching kitchen. Parents and school nurses and students at the neighboring school saw what was going on, and they got jealous. And before you knew it, every school district on the South Fork of Long Island had its own edible schoolyard and was competing with its neighbors to work as much local produce as possible into the cafeteria menu. At last count, 16 schools on the East End now have a garden, greenhouse, or other project to get students into the farm field and the kitchen. And this is not a big community. It was contagious. We know that good eating habits start at home, but particularly at a time when our nation faces an unprecedented obesity epidemic.